My name's Daphne Donahue. I am sort of a lawyer in pause while I work on raising my 4 kids, 3 of whom have type 1 diabetes. I would like to be known as an advocate. In my professional life, I was an assistant federal defender working in the federal courts in the District of Maine, so in Portland, representing indigent defendants. I was a fierce advocate for them, and I've now transitioned into being a fierce advocate for my kids, 3 of whom have this chronic illness that is, I think, not widely understood, but which requires around-the-clock, full-time monitoring, medical care. I'm on the phone with insurance companies all the time. I'm, navigating their classrooms, their care from their nurses at school. It's just a constant thing. Also keeping them alive, quite like in a different way than I keep my oldest child alive. And what I come back to again and again is just advocating. And I hope to kind of, as they get older, carry that back into the practice of law or into raising awareness about type 1 diabetes, which is something I'm pretty passionate about. So that's really what I'd like to be known as an advocate. The first word that comes to mind to describe Maine is home. I grew up here until I went away to boarding school, and then I went away to college, and then I did my first year of law school in New Jersey, and then all of a sudden I was like, I have to come home. And Maine, I think, acts as this grounding spot for so many of us who grew up here and then went off and had adventures or got our education somewhere else, and then you come back and there's a sense of like, okay, I'm where I'm supposed to be. I'm home, and it's just such a beautiful place. I think the biggest challenge facing Portland specifically at this point, I think there are 2. I think it's a lack of access to affordable housing, which I know you've talked about in this project. I think that goes in tandem with this mental health crisis, the addiction crisis, and all of that has a strong interplay with the criminal justice system. And I think until on a state level we pursue some criminal justice reform in tandem with making housing affordable to people who have criminal backgrounds or have addiction issues, we're going to continue to create this sort of, for lack of a better word, underclass of people who are really being left out. They're just, the services aren't there to support adults who have these extra needs. And it's doing a disservice to all of us. But more than that, it's leaving out an entire segment of the population who deserve equity in every area of their life. In 5 years, I think I would see Maine trending towards accessibility. I think right now, Southern Maine in particular is trending towards the inaccessibility. I mean, so you're sort of shutting out an entire segment of the child-raising population. People who have student loans, people who just don't have $1 million to buy a house. What I'd love to see in Maine is greater diversity, not only racial diversity, but also socioeconomic diversity, particularly in these areas where we have so much to give and where, the school systems are so great, and we need to make sure that everyone has access to that. I think women, from sort of the moment you're born, fight this like extra battle that men don't fight to be taken seriously. And I think that it gives us an insight into how to navigate spaces, creating sort of a sense of gravitas around us. But I do think that women can bring to the table an awareness of every side of the issue. Like when I sit down with other male lawyers to have a conversation about a defendant, often it's sort of like, well, this is what they did on paper and this is their criminal record. And what I find about women is that we can say, yeah, this is what it looks like on paper, but like also think about, who their parents were, think about the education they got, think about, what they were eating, for Christ's sake, when they were a kid, and what medications they needed that they didn't get. And I think that that's sort of a micro example of what I find most women leaders do, which is to like look at a problem from every angle. That is what makes coalitions of women so powerful, is that you're bringing together a bunch of women, so you're looking at the thing from the sky and the bottom of the earth, right? It's just like this whole 360 view of what needs to happen. When I was a kid and I would envision myself being a mother, I just always envisioned like a house full of girls who read and did theater and painted. But I have found that raising my four kids is totally different than I expected motherhood to look. you know, like there's not a whole lot of like sitting calmly and putting a puzzle together, but they all love to read and they love to play dress up. And it's the most important thing in our household is to raise, people say this all the time, but to like raise kind humans. And I think that that gets a little bit lost, especially in a place like Yarmouth, where it's like, what soccer practice are you doing? What sports are you doing? What after school activities are you doing? And we, because we have these kids with a chronic illness, have to like really slow everything down. It has taught us that the most important thing is just spending time with these humans. And raising boys is such a critical part of the mission of equity, of gender equity, because you need to be raising young men, young people who from birth are taught that no one is better than anyone else just because of how they look or whether they have a penis or a vagina. That's something that we really keep at the forefront of our parenting. I will say one of my children identifies now as non-binary and has since they were about probably about 4 or 5, and that's been a really interesting part of raising kids too, is to sort of challenge like these essentialist views that we were raised with, and to see that like my kid goes to school and no one is like, oh, there's the kid with long hair who is non-binary. Oh, there's the kid who's good at Foursquare and likes to play soccer and was in the goalie last week. That's been pretty amazing too. And in terms of raising kids with a chronic illness, it's incredibly lonely. I have the most wonderful group of friends and a wonderful family, but there's something about raising children who have to, from such a young age, be mindful about every moment of their day, that really sets you apart from other parents, because we just carry this worry that is, it's not the average worry. I know what the average worry is like, right? It's the extra worry of, if I do this wrong, or if the nurse does this wrong, or if my kid is biking home and doesn't drink a juice, are they gonna have a seizure? Are they gonna die? And I think that those are things we don't really talk about, right? Like, you go out in the world as a parent of a kid with a chronic illness, and you're like, my kid can do anything that any other kid could do. We go to sailing camp, and they didn't want to let the kids sail this summer, and we were like, oh, absolutely not. Our kids can do whatever the fuck they want. But then you get home, and you're like, holy shit, but like, what if something goes wrong on the water? Really, again, it comes back to advocacy. It's like, on the one hand, you're advocating for your children to just be whoever they want to be. And then on the other hand, you're walking around with this really lonely, isolating feeling of just a constant worry. From the minute they wake up, okay, breakfast, they're gonna eat this yogurt, but on the bike ride to school, are they gonna need to have a couple of gummies because otherwise their blood sugar is gonna go so low that they're not gonna make it to school? The other morning, Friday, my son, for no reason at all, his blood sugar was dangerously high. To the point where the nurse called me and said, William's blood sugar is at 578, and I gasped. We never get that high. And so I immediately put the baby in the car and we went and spent an hour at the school. It has changed every aspect of our lives and every aspect of parenting. And I think that holds true for so many people who are raising kids with differences. And I really just want to name that. I want people to feel comfortable talking about those moments, because it's important to let people be their whole experience. It's not just about, oh, my kid can do whatever your kid can